All right, everybody. I want to welcome you to another Blackmore Partners Inc. and a Blackmore Connect virtual private equity webinar for those who are in the private equity community or want to get in the private equity community. Blackmore Partners was started in 2005 as a CEO first program for executives. And what we do is we start with you to help you develop a acquisition-based deal thesis to monetize your background into a deal. When the deal closes, the executive gets salary. It could be between 250 and $1 million a year. Depends on the revenue and EBITDA size of your first target. It grows, of course, as we do more acquisitions. EBITDA improvement bonuses of at least 50% of improvement, and then 5% equity and without putting money in, and another up to another 10% through various means. Private equity is a profession. It's its own unique world. That's why we have, besides putting together deals, we put together 24 deals, including add-ons since 2005. So we are your private equity toolkit, if you would, where your back office. Our goal, once again, is to help you monetize your background into a deal. And you don't need to quit your day job. And if you're interested in that and want to learn how to get into private equity, one of the things that we encourage you to do is attend our virtual private equity conferences. They happen every 9 weeks. They're always virtual. Conference number 45, I think, is coming up, or 46. We've been doing them since 2007. And these are wonderful educational opportunities to meet firsthand with private equity. In addition, we do 6 pre-conference workshops and 3 post-conference workshops to assist you in being ready for your meeting with private equity, because private equity has a very, very, very short attention span. So part of what we are, the Blackmore Connects group is, we like to call it the Association for Private Equity. We have the bandwidth to do what most execs can't do because of the skills and toolkits that you need. So we have proprietary databases with private equity firms. We also have databases of owners that could be potential acquisitions by you. We have various databases such as PitchBook, Syndex, and SourceGraph to help you find owners that match your acquisition-based deal thesis. There's a lot to learn in private equity. And I like Gary Marshall's quote: what Blackmore Connects does is somewhat unique. If it is not your specialty, why would you try and do it alone? We're agreeing about doing deals, getting into private equity. Private equity is a profession and has its own unique language. Your skills are important, but it's more than just being a great operator. And we know those of you who are on this call but you want to be an investor operator. And that's a different lens that then informs you how you operate the company within the private equity context and the investor mindset. So why would you try and do it alone? You wouldn't try and ride a horse or ride a bull if you've never had any kind of introduction or training. And that's what Blackmore Connects does for you in private equity. So we have a frequently asked questions here and why. So make sure you check that out. And you can go ahead, and the best way to learn about the website is you go ahead and click. And I'm clicking the learning more if that's not working. And I would mention, there we go. It's a little bit of a slow delay. You can learn more by getting an appointment with Chris Melton. So that's what that does to learn more about it. Let's see. Let's talk the Blackmore Connects. Okay. So this gives you a little bit of an overview. Association for Executives and Capital Providers Growing Wealth. And Private equity is about getting equity. So think about when you typically leave a company, you get a nice, hey, thanks for being with us. You might get 6 months salary and a few other benefits. If you're making 500K, it'll be close to that. Now with our deal making, we're looking to have an executive leave with a minimum of 5 million. That's on the, if we're not doing a great job with you in the deal. And we've had executives we work with over 25 million. And then went on to do another deal with another private equity with the same company and got 50 million exit. So you can see, if you want to know some of the private equity firms that we partner with, we partner with a few hundred a year. I attend over 20 private equity conferences every year in order to find private equity firms that are CEO first executives. Okay. So that's really key. If you want to know more about these conferences, they're $39.99. However, for your first conference, if you want to do what we call private equity light, just email me, Gerald.O'Dwyer@Blackman Partners LLC, and I will consider you for a potential guest slot. For each conference, I sponsor 10 executives for each conference, 6 conferences a year. So you can take a look at all the benefits here. What do we do for executives? We work with you on education about the private equity training, live training, mentorship, coaching, workshops, all included. Free experience via webinars, such as what we're doing here with Paul, networking, resources and tools, advisory, legal, administration. We almost do it all. And if you'd like to understand some of the benefits of attending these, you can go to the benefits page, learn about the language, learn about the industry. It's more than often what you think it is, because there's no one really to tell you about private equity. People are too busy trying to get deals done than educate executives. So we've been doing the executive education part since we started in 2005. Once again, our mission is to find backable executives like you on the phone to assist you to monetize your background into an acquisition-based deal thesis and get a deal done. And typically it's about 5 to 10 hours a week. It is a long process. It's a journey. Deal making is fraught with all sorts of challenges. But here are just some of the benefits here. Okay, so go ahead and check that out. The agenda, what's the agenda like? Well, we have it right here. The virtual conference agenda is, we have the conference dates right here. The workshops, they're an hour and a half each, and 3 post-conference workshops. And the day of the conference is, again, they're virtual. Conference 46 is on December 13th. It is sold out, by the way, so you cannot get in. And once again, if you send me your resume and with the word guest slot, I'll review it. If I have the funding still left, by the time I get your resume, I'll forward you to Chris Melton with approval to be a guest for the February workshop. So please make sure that you're considering that. So once again, this is another private equity webinar put on by Blackman Connects. I'm your host, Gerald O'Dwyer. Today we have a special guest. This is the second time that Paul and I work together. And one of the biggest topics in private equity today, besides deal making, getting deals done, is value creation. A lot of people think they know what value creation. How would you describe it in a few sentences to give context to what we're going to be talking about?
Well, 2 of the core pieces that you need to look at are productivity and growth. Those are the engines that create value. Productivity gets you increased EBITDA, and growth gets you into higher revenue ranges which not only improves EBITDA, but also gets you into higher multiples as you're a larger company. So those are two core pieces.
That's really great. And, value creation, especially these days with high interest rate, with how much you're paying via your private equity partner for call, is you, before you even get started inside the company, you want to be developing your private equity playbook. And one of them is around value creation. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about how to accelerate through enthusiastic buy-in. Now, that is an important thing because it's not just because you want it or you have planned it. You have to get buy-in into rapid change. And private equity, by all means, think of it as you're going from driving your regular street car to driving a Maserati. And private equity they want race car drivers. So you have to be seeing way down the track. It takes a different way of thinking to speed up your brain so you don't crash, because speed kills, folks, but not if you trained for it. So this is one of the many training webinars. We also do this, of course, through Blackmore Connects. Once again, send me your resume with the word guest in it, and we'll consider you for a guest slot. Send that any time. For those of you who are getting this recording, the next conference is in February. That'll be conference number. So today we're going to be talking about overview and examples of key value creation, dynamics of change, the process, buy-in, etc. So Paul, welcome back. And we're going to, by the way, we do these every 2 or 3 months. Next one we'll probably do is the end of January to kick off the year. So Paul, I'm going to make you the presenter, and then you can tell why I'm doing that. Go ahead and tell us how you want to frame this webinar today.
Great. So welcome everybody. So we're first going to talk about some things you might see in a PE environment that you may not see in your middle market or corporate environment. And let me get my screen showing.
Yeah.
There we go.
And everybody, just to do a little test that you're all here, raise your hand so we know you're here and you can hear us. Go ahead. Do a little raise your hands, Paul. We want to know that people are fully with us. That you can click on raising your hand. I'm getting a few. This is, by the way, one of the ways that when you have a question, you can, if you want to be called on and ask it verbally, I'll unmute you. If you want to do this via a question, there's a chat box. I'm going to say hello. Okay. Right here. So there's the chat box where you can ask questions. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. So questions, as Gerald said, questions, welcome anytime, directly or through the chat. So we'll look at some outcome examples and the practical dynamics of change. How do you actually get that acceleration? And as we do that, we're going to walk through a particular private equity portfolio case that'll illustrate the things that we're talking about, including getting buy-in to change in a day, in months and weeks and years, but in a day, implementation of change at speed, no hiccup, ongoing digital transformation. So get beyond a single implementation to having an environment that promotes and supports digital transformation, and development of an improvement-seeking culture. So this is not a case of, well, we're doing continuous improvement. It's where everybody in the company is looking for ways to improve. That's our agenda for today. So I'm going to go ahead, and I've just given you the agenda there. The first thing we're going to look at is some of the situations and challenges you might see in a private equity situation. First, as Gerald alluded to, need accelerated change and growth. Speed, speed is the essential issue here. So, need accelerated change and growth. You're all often going to see departure of a founder, and in a situation where there may be some lack of process and infrastructure in that situation. So you're going to come in and need to recreate that. There may be customer threats to leave. There's some uncertainty around acquisitions and change of control. And there may be some customer departures or threats as a result of that. Technology, late, over budget, and not used. This occurs not only in private equity, but in other situations. They may have a history of failed initiatives. So you're going to need to restart and build. We'll look at the elements you need to build credibility and get that improvement mindset instilled. If there is a history of failed initiatives, then you're going to see low morale and change resistance culture, and perhaps failed acquisition integration. We're actually going to track one of those through as we go. All of these have the backdrop of time as the essential resource. So what I'm going to show, what we're going to talk about today, we've been doing this for 30 years. And these are just some of the types of companies that we work with. I'm going to give you a couple examples of what we mean by accelerated value creation, centered around productivity and growth. So here's an automotive case. They're lower quartile performance with quality and delivery issues. A good amount of their production had to go through a third-party audit before they could ship it. So there's some hurt there. And keeping with our theme of let's do things quickly, I'm just going to go right to the end here. We resolved in that company 75 issues in 30 days using a visual twin, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. From that, they had a 30% increase in earnings in 6 months without firing anybody, developed the improvement seeking culture that we're going to talk about, pursued and achieved in 12 months their first ever business with Toyota, and then doubled sales and tripled earnings from that point in the next 18 months. So starting with lower quartile, in 15 to 18 months, they pursued and achieved their first business with Toyota. Here's an aerospace defense company overburdened with 80 years of legacy regulations and the documentation of all of that, driven now by a few experts operating in silos. Again, go to the end, reduced engineering changes by $2 million a year, increased cash flow in the company, streamlined their engineering flow and project management, and multiplied the value that they received in the sale to a strategic buyer. Another example of accelerated. Here's a specialty chemical case, and we're actually going to follow this one through the rest of the presentation. The call that I got from the PE portfolio CFO was, we're at 50% on-time delivery. When can you be here? Here's the situation that they found. A failed acquisition integration. So this is a private equity with a sponsor. They bought a company that was, in fact, twice their size. They tried to integrate one of the locations, hired a big consulting company to do that. In a year, they hadn't done the integration, driven to 50% on-time delivery, which, as you can imagine, people are pretty discouraged. A lot of broken processes, and in their case, obsolete technology. They had a Windows and Apple technology stack, so some confusion on the technology. They had a new ERP, which had been selected and configured by the location that they were shutting down. So you can imagine it wasn't particularly well suited for their location. And all the inventory was in location A1A in their ERP. And by the way, nothing in the warehouse was legal. So that's the opening situation. The result, 96 plus percent on-time delivery while reducing inventory 22%. And the company was sold to a strategic for an above market multiple. So there are some examples of what we mean by accelerated value creation. It is often said, well, we're going to use technology to create that value. And I'm going to submit that the last thing you need for digital transformation and effective technology, technology is the last thing. I'll support that as we go through, but that's a key piece regarding digital transformation. We're going to look at 5 key elements for accelerating value creation and productivity and growth. I'll list them quickly and then we'll go through each one. First, clear business objectives. Second, people and process before technology, as I just alluded to. Identify the data needed to operate, monitor, and improve. Identify the source and quality of the data. They skip a step that is often skipped with some not very pleasant results. And with that, you now have a very sound basis to select and implement the right technology on an ongoing basis. Just what somebody came back from a conference and said, I saw this, it's really neat, we should do it. You're building a whole environment that lets you implement the technologies that are appropriate to your business. We're going to start with clear business objectives. Fairly straightforward. Focused on business outcomes, not on what we're going to do, but what are the outcomes we're going to achieve? How are we going to measure that? And how is that going to create the value that we want? Those objectives need to be relevant to the organization and relatable to everyone. So everybody needs to see, how does what I'm doing connect to achieving those objectives, and supported by the right action. So if you're bringing in outside assistance, make sure you've got qualifications there, and supported by funding. In special chemical case, their objective when I interviewed them was, we need to get to 80% on time in 8 months. Seems like a long time. When you're operating at 50%, why don't the customers all just leave? And it turns out they had a fair bit of their customer base was cosmetics, and those companies have pretty heavy validation requirements. So there really wasn't an option for them to leave, just leave. They also said, we have a customer service problem. Well, if you continuously frame things as this is a customer service problem, everybody in the organization gets the idea that it's the customer service department that's failing. And so one of the very first things that we did is change that message to great service to customers, which was something that everybody in the organization could relate to. Second, people and process before technology. Fix it. That's what I heard over the phone from my boss in Chicago. So I'd been hired by Amoco when I was 22 to manage ship construction in Spain. Spain was building oil tankers for us. And this story relates directly to the discovery of many of the things that I'll detail later in the presentation. A year into my work there, my boss sent me over to Lisbon, where one of these ships was under repair, to see if there are things we could learn that would apply to the new ships under construction. In the inspections, one of the things we opened up was the bottom end bearings of the main engine. So that's a 30,000 horsepower diesel engine. And this is just to give you an idea of scale. And what we saw when we opened that up was all of the bearing material that is supposed to be in the bearing was in fact lying on the crankshaft journal in pieces. This is really bad, really bad. So I called my boss in Chicago and described what the situation was, and he gave me those two famous words: fix it. I'm 23. I have no authority. I have no domain knowledge. I don't speak Spanish or Portuguese. I have no staff, no budget. And we don't have a contract with the company that builds the engine. We have a contract with the shipyard, but not the company that builds the engine. And they build it under license from the Dane. Perfect. This is perfectly set up to make rapid change happen. No obstacles. I go to Spain and ask the management, the engine builder manager, what's the plan? And they look at me and say, well, we don't really think we have a problem. We think the Danes have a problem. They designed the engine. We just built it according to what they said. So I'm sitting in my hotel rooms in Spain wondering how we're going to get a positive result out of this, but convinced that I'll figure out a way to do it. I go down on the floor to see how they actually make the bearings. They only speak Spanish and I only speak English at that point, but lots of ways to communicate if you really want to. And one of the things they communicate is management told them that I was there to tell them how to fix the bearings. I didn't even know what they did. So I'm thinking, what can I do to convert this lack of knowledge to my advantage? And what I did was I said to them, okay, I don't know anything about making bearings, but you do this every day. Why don't we work together and see if we can connect what you do in making the bearings with the adverse effects we see in the bearings themselves? Works beyond my wildest dreams. They get very enthused about participating and contributing in figuring out what's wrong. And in a couple of weeks, we not only fix the issues, we permanently raise their manufacturing capability. And because of the way I was forced to or invented, your choice, work with them, the management and the employees owned the process and the result. I was astounded at the power of this approach. Look at where I started, look at what we achieved. And I saw that this could be applied actually not just to a problem, but to larger issues in an organization and even a whole company. And from that, I took two key principles, which I use every day to accelerate performance in companies. First principle, 90% of the issues that waste time and money and produce poor results are embedded in a company's processes and interactions. So by that, we mean, I'm not going to read all this, but this is the full set of things that happen in a company. Everything from front end customer interaction and marketing to process design, production, inventory, quality, packaging, environment. It's the whole set of processes and interactions. Everything is related.
Oh,
Yes.
you know what I like about this here, this list? As part of your due diligence efforts when you're talking with owners. So part of Blackmore with Blackmore, when we're putting deals with executives, and if you're just joining us, again, our mission is to find backable executives like those of you who are on this phone and help you put your own deal together. Now, why would you want to put your own deal together versus someone handing it to you? Because in the private equity world, our statistics show, and by just asking executives who are in PE, did you get a payout? And so many executives, Paul, that I talk to, they tell me they're in PE, they understand PE. And I said, well, tell me, what was your revenue when you started? What was your the EBITDA when you started? And at the end, and then how much equity did you get? How much was it worth day one? And in the end, 75% of them report their equity is worth zero or was underwater when they left. How is that possible, Paul? Because they didn't know what they're getting into. And often, if a PE firm calls you, like Mr. Executive coming into this, Mrs. Executive, Ms. Executive, if they're calling you, it's because there's a problem. And part of your job is you have to do due diligence. What are your shares worth? It's Heck, you make a change. Well, those changes, if you have to do a turnaround first before your shares are not worth any money. And that's often the case. So the executives think they're getting something, but they're getting underwater shares. And what I like about it, this is your template for asking questions to not only the P, but the owner when you're trying to do your own deal. Anyway, our two of the most recent deals that Blackmore did, we did an average of 8 times cash and cash. So if you imagine your shares were worth $1 million day one, and that would be a low amount of shares. And then 3 years, 4 years, 5 years later, they're worth 8 million. That's a big payday. Why? Because we always start with you early to get into the weeds in these companies, so that you can find the hidden value early instead of day one when you're getting in there, you're getting hit with all these problems and issues. So just as a reminder, if you want to send me your resume with the word guest, we can evaluate you for a potential guest slot to be a guest at our virtual private equity program. And Paul, your thoughts on my comments?
Yeah, it actually feeds right in. One of the things that we always see is things usually work differently than they're documented or expected. And if you're going in looking at the documentation that's saying, okay, then all looks according to Hoyle, be aware things usually work differently than documented or expected. We'll touch more on that. But if you don't recognize that and don't address that, you're going to be underwater, and turnaround efforts really suffer a lot. I mentioned in our example case, they brought in a company, a well-respected consultant to do an integration, and that consultant failed to consider getting quickly to reality. They were trying to work top level down with bad information, and they drove the company to 50% on time delivery. So understanding what you really have is the core. And we'll see that later in the presentation too. So that's our first principle. 90% of the issues are embedded in process and interactions, which usually work differently than documented or expected. Second principle, good news in this case, you have reporting to work every day. The world's experts at knowing what they do every day, how we get that, all of that expertise engaged to help us achieve the acceleration we're looking for. So let's go back to why processes diverge from documentation and expectations. And I'll just give you a few highlights here. IT systems and Excel, common all over the place. And perhaps the IT system, perhaps the people who do the work consulted, work part of the implementation of the IT systems. So they don't really meet what you need, and people still expected to do the work. So they're going to do a workaround. What's the favorite work tool for workaround? Excel. In other cases, the business has changed from the environment the IT systems were designed for. Same issue. If you can't get it out of the system, build an Excel workaround. And I ask you to do a mental checklist of the use of Excel in your company and workarounds you may or may not know about. But that's one reason that we've seen processes diverge. The second is ineffective design or capture in the first place. So if it's not effective, then people are going to find a way around it. They may be that they didn't really capture the tribal knowledge that exists, or perhaps the system was designed only for the good case. That's what the documentation says. But I mean, and all of these we've seen, right? Or you have a system that's designed around ISO 9000 or some other standard certifications and doesn't really reflect what the business needs, how the business needs to operate. It's designed to satisfy the auditors. Lack of a change process. If you're changing the documentation and the process doesn't work the way the documentation says, you could change the documentation a lot. It has no effect on the process. There's a whole cascading set of things in lack of a change process. Maybe management has made the change process so difficult that people won't use it. They'll just make the change and you get a very different system working than you have. Even growth, if you're operating at one level and you're introducing change, the work may be done by, let's just a simple case, one person or one area. As you grow, you need more of that capability. So the work expands and the process actually changes by osmosis, not by direction. So all of these are four key things why processes diverge. I'll give you an example. This is one client. This was the number one warranty issue in a $300 million automotive supplier. This is what their documentation said. This is the level at which they were trying to resolve this and weren't having success. What we found, and I know you can't read it, that's not the point here, but 9 different functions were involved in doing this. There's not 10 steps, there's over 100 steps in this process. We found 3 new Excel sheets that nobody knew existed and 2 databases that were in use, but not identified, not part of the consideration. So what do you do if this is the reality, but this is what people think is happening? Well, here's an example in terms of getting agreement on change. So let's just simplistically say, here's the problems, the works, and the opportunities. And one person comes in with all goodwill. Here is the best solution they see based on the part of the process that they see or understand. Somebody else comes in and they have a different perception of how things work. So they have their own solution to that. Each one, if the perception was right, might be the best solution. But how do you resolve this kind of thing? How do these kind of things get resolved? And usually that looks like, well, what's your position in the company? Who's your mentor? How long have you been here? No. What's your ability to argue on your feet? What kind of, maybe there's a political issue here. How many chips are you willing to invest in getting your solution adopted? And what's clear from all of those is none of those are getting at solving the problem. And it looks more like this than a smooth traffic flow. And any kind of improvement can feel like squeezing a water balloon. I got it here. No, it's the move. moved over there. So these are not unique to one particular company. In fact, if you look at Gallup and others reporting, what they result in is 70% of change initiatives fail to achieve their objectives. And by the way, that's a statistic that's been reported for 20 years. So if we accept, let's call them traditional ways of working, we're never going to get to that accelerated value. So what the surveys claim is two major issues are lack of employee engagement and resistance to change. We've been doing large scale change with companies and getting management and employees bought in and rapidly achieving change for 30 years. And in our experience, what we see is what employees really resist is being a changee without a voice. But if you engage them in participation and contribution, they will change in a heartbeat. This was our specialty chemical case where we started. Failed acquisition, low on-time delivery, discouraged people, broken processes. Given that environment, where do you start? And Gerald, if there are any questions, this would be a time to take them, take a couple.
Hey, folks, I'd like you to raise your hand. I would like to do this by audio. So I'm going to get, there were hands raised. I don't know if those were questions, but you can type them right now or just better. Let's just raise your hand. Let's go to Randall. I just saw Randall raise his hand. Randall, I'm going to call on you. There's Randall and Patty. Let's go to Randall. Randall, I'm going to take you off mute. Okay, go ahead, Randall.
So in this process, when you go into identify, how do you engage the frontline folks to get them to understand that their bosses are actually in support of this?
Great question. That is, in fact, the next thing that we're going to talk about is, yes, the expertise is there. How do you get that up on the table where you could use it? So I'm directly going to address that in the next part.
Okay, we'll do that after we get to some of the other questions. I do want to remind everyone, please send me your resume with the word guest in the subject matter. We'll review you if you want to be a guest at one of our virtual private equity conference. Number 47 is in February. Number 46, December 13th, is sold out. And I'll sponsor you if you have a P&L. And anyway, let's go to Patty. Patty People. And I'm going to unmute you, Patty. Go ahead, Patty. Nope, that isn't Patty. She disappeared as soon as I went to call on her. Interesting. Okay, let's go to Joseph. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead. You're going to have to unmute yourself.
Hi, Paul. I've been involved in 4 turnarounds of financial institutions. And some of your points about IT relevance really struck home. What I've run into is management is in denial of bad decisions that they made. Perhaps the technology that they purchased for $500,000 was inappropriate and implementation went badly, but the actual software was inadequate for the size of the institution. Right. And the result was that when presented with these facts with supporting data, management went into a denial that they had made a bad decision. And I'm wondering if, in your experience in various industries, if you run into that.
That is a very common starting point. Yeah, and actually, this is also something we're going to talk about. It's already baked into the presentation. That you really need to solve the issues from the bottom up, get to reality very broadly, very deeply, very quickly. so that it's simply not possible to disregard that data. That
It's really
it's,
great. Paul, one of the interesting things, I'm not doing consulting, although you can say I do consulting in private equity every day with executives like who are here. One of the biggest issues with bad decision making is the system reinforces bad decision making. It creates its own matrix, if you will, of bad decision making. And I think one of the things that you said is people think the system is this, but it's something else. So it's very easy to have bad decision frameworks, is one of my theories that I operate with senior management in a way so they can, if you will, own it without feeling blamed. Your thoughts, Paul?
yeah, if they don't have the information to make better decisions, then those aren't going to happen. And it needs to be very, very, very clear from reality, not what George said or what
Yeah.
Peggy interpretation is, or it cannot be on a personal basis. You can't attack values. You can't do this on a purely confrontational basis because all you do is cement positions.
Yeah. Really great. Paul, we're going to move on from questions. Our next one that we do, we'll do an hour and a half so we can fit in more because, again, your topic's so exciting. That's why this is the second time we're working with Paul. And so we'll get more questions if we have time at the end. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, technology, the last thing you need for digital transformation. We'll get there. And Joseph, this is partly relevant to your question. So how do we get this to Randall's question? How do we get productivity and growth? How do we make that happen? And there are four key elements that I'll talk about here. One is building trust. Second is getting very quickly to reality, building momentum, and ensuring sustainability. So building trust. First element, what happens if if a management says, okay, there's going to be some big changes coming along, or heaven forfend, a consultant shows up? What's the first thought that goes through employees' mind? Most commonly, not only how does this affect me, am I still going to have a job out of this? Am I going to get fired? And if you don't address that in the first 5 minutes, I mean, immediately address that fear exists, your initiative is likely to be falling in that 70% failure range, and you don't even know it yet. So eliminating fear. What we have found, so we've been doing this for 30 years, is when we do this with a company, we are creating productivity and growth. It will happen. So as that happens, that creates opportunity for everybody. That's one piece of building trust and supporting that elimination of fear. A second piece is people have lots of experience with consulting engagements where some consultant showed up, told them, I'm the grandest tiger in the jungle. You should listen to me. And here's what you should do. And then it didn't work. So a key piece of building trust is to recognize that key principle I said right up front, recognize that employees are the world's experts at knowing what they actually do. Not only recognize, tell them that you recognize that. And as you do that, and all those four elements work together, this is part of getting participation and contribution to change in one day. because employees see, okay, I can see that there's something in it for me. And we tell them, hey, we're actually going to talk with you, listen to you, capture that in a visual twin and make presaging some of the other things here. Let's get quickly to reality. Here are our process and interactions that we looked at before. Who knows how those work? Second principle, employees. How do we get their participation? Well, here's one approach, very common. Start by defining how things are going to happen around here now. Documenting that so that we, whoever the management controlling, we understand it. Try to get the buy-in from the employees. You've already created a pretty heavy headwind for resistance here, but try to get the buy-in and then audit the heck out of them to see if they're actually following it. This is deadly, absolutely deadly. Our favorite approach is let's start at the other end of the absolute other end of the spectrum. What are we actually doing? What are we really following? I don't care what the documentation says. What are you actually doing by interview, by observation? That they are bought in at some level to doing that because that's how they get through the day and get their work done. They understand how it happens. Why don't we document that? And as we look at that, then we can see where there are places that we might want to make changes. We can see they can tell us because they understand how things really work. So let's look at what capturing those real processes looks like. And then we'll go through this pretty quick. This is large scale process capture, which is live for a company. So all of those are individual processes. The upper left is what I call a top level diagram. It's the whole company. And this is what I call a visual twin of the company. And a very important piece is if you do this in 2 years, nobody cares. If you do this in 6 months, nobody cares. But if you capture this in weeks and implement change as you go, the capture, you can clearly see processes and interactions, responsibilities, data flow and capture, complexity, opportunities for improvement based on reality. And now you can implement those changes immediately. So with the implementation is part of what builds momentum. Implementing immediately as you proceed, and that gets the whole organization participating and contributing to achieve transformation improvements in productivity and profitability and growth. So this is not a one person, one tool, one thing. This is the whole organization participating and contributing. And how does that feel in a company? Here are some examples. Employees become a fountain of ideas. We've had them chase us down in the company when they see something that says, hey, this doesn't work for us. It doesn't happen very often. We need to make sure you see it. And when you see it, we know it'll get incorporated and resolved. Supervisors leading process change. We had a client that the 3-shift manufacturing operation, the production supervisors stopped going out for smoke breaks and came in to talk with us about process change that they wanted. And mic drop, these are not the people who are generally leading this parade. Another company, chronic absenteeism to a record number of perfect attendance awards. Made a paper to electronic transition in the company in 3 weeks. no grumbling, no, oh, this doesn't work. For 3 weeks, full company converted. And really importantly, all the credit goes to management and employees as we're doing. So this is not our system. This is their system at a level they have never seen it and been able to work with it before. So back to our PE specialty chemical case, initial state, we talked about 50% on time delivery, identified and simultaneously implemented 14 key initiatives. Knowing how your system really works lets you pursue multiple initiatives, not just, well, we can only work on one or two things at a time. We worked on 14 separate initiatives, and actual implementation in 5 months got them to 86% on time in full without technology, just process and execution and the buy-in of the employees. So ensuring sustainability, you can do anything once, but to really create value, you need to be able to do this on an ongoing basis. So that's part of getting the whole organization participating. This is not isolated efforts by one or two people in one or two areas. This is the whole organization participating and contributing. And that action and rapid implementation creates two things: a safe environment for change, because people see that they can bring up a change and it will be evaluated and adopted on its merits quickly. Not, well, it's, we review these changes every quarter and see what we want to do. No, implement right away. Safe environments for change also creates an improvement seeking culture. So people talk about continuous improvement. Well, continuous improvement is kind of everybody else's responsibility. There's no accountability track to that. Improvement seeking culture means everybody is looking for ways to make improvements, not only in their areas, but in other things that they see that may affect them, or just they see a better way to do something. And that becomes the way that we do business here. In the current environment, what's one of the number one things that employees are concerned about? Attracting and retaining employees, and having that safe environment for change, improvement seeking culture creates an environment to attract and retain employees. I'm going to go through these next pieces pretty quick. Gerald, I'm okay to go beyond the 1 hour if we need to, but that's up to you. So data needed to operate, monitor, and improve. The process knowledge that we have clarifies the data we really need, so we can link from the processes to the data that we need to manage and improve the organization. And with that data and mindset, now we get data insights and data-driven decision-making. And that's part of the issues, Joseph, that you mentioned. How do you get management involved in that to change direction? And part of that is data based on the processes and how all of those are linked together. Fourth issue, source and quality of data. Very common data environment. Excel everywhere, not linked to each other, tribal knowledge, not data, rules of thumb, unreliable data, lack of ownership. All of these are issues that you will need to address before technology can be a really effective tool. And especially chemical case was no exception. Excel everywhere, different names for the same product. Quality data not reviewed. They lose data at the source and try to find it later. And that's very common, not only there, but elsewhere. Coming, you've got IoT and a flood of data. So if you really don't sort out source and quality, you really don't have a basis on which your technology can work. And then again, Joseph, that's part of that issue is knowing what you're trying to achieve and then being able to match the technology. Doing all of this work gets you an environment in which you can select and implement the right technology on an ongoing, not episode, but now let's look at some of those digital transformation elements. I'm not going to go through these in detail. You can look at the kind of things that are there that people look to see what can we do to adopt a digital way of working. So it raises the question, why don't we just implement the technology without understanding how things actually work? Let's just do it. And maybe that was the issue, Joseph, with the situations you were talking about. Well, here's our processes and interactions. We layer the digital transformation on the perceived processes. And what do we get? To nobody's surprise, IT and business disaster. No buy-in, extended implementation time, rework, blown budgets, and the business objectives aren't met. That's what happens when you don't go through this process up front, people in process first, and accelerate and use that to accelerate. So that's the key piece in getting to the right technology. In the special chemical case, we did a large scale ERP extension 6 months faster than the vendor thought possible, including finding and resolving a vendor software defect. Product had been out there for 5 years. They hadn't identified the defect. We did. And when we did the cutover of the whole plant, we did it everything, front to back, top, everything in 4 hours. And the outcome of that was overall 50% starting point for on-time delivery to 96+% on-time delivery while reducing inventory by 22%. And within several months, they sold the company to a strategic buyer for well over market rates. Pitfalls avoided, technology and process incompatibilities, creation of known workarounds, rework of technology implementation, less than expected performance, extended time over budget.
So we could go on for a long time. And Paul, our next one for end of January, February, we'll do an hour and a half. I want to thank everyone for being here. Please, if you would like to get into private equity, if you've been in it before, you want to go to the next level of private equity, please consider being my guest. You have to be approved. I actually put money out, so I have to look at your resume. So please get to me, Gerald.O. Just respond to the webinar invite, and that's the best way to find it. Get a hold of me. Put the word guest slot, or I probably won't get back to you in the subject. Okay, very important. Paul, how do people reach you?
And I put up on the screen, you can book a discovery call directly on my calendar through calendly.com/pvrangel4bb. And that'll a Zoom call, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and we can proceed from there. Otherwise, you can view us on our website at forabetterbusiness.com, the number 4 followed by abetterbusiness.com. And I've shown my email address there too, pvrangel@forabetterbusiness.com. I'd welcome any comments or questions you have. Happy to continue the discussions that we started here. If people have questions or comments, things that they'd like to discuss as a result of this, please book a discovery call. Let's talk about it.
Yes. And, once again, Blackmore connects and Blackmore puts on these webinars. We have probably 4 webinars a month. We are the nonstop shop for private equity education, getting your deals done. If you want to get into the exciting, what I call hedge against inflation and private equity, send me an email. We can get you started simultaneously with the backable executive process. But please consider it being a guest at one of our conferences. It's kind of a teaser because what we want to do is really work with you thoroughly on getting deals done in private equity. And that's a journey. Thanks, Paul. Well, till next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.